special occasion. My name is Catherine Burke, and I'm the president of the Brookline Education Foundation. On behalf of the BEF, I thank you all for being here and also for watching from home. We're so excited to be hosting the 2021 class of Margaret Metzger Fellows, and not just because we don't go out anymore. This class of Brookline educators is the 6th group to have written their tales from the classroom, but the first one forged by a worldwide pandemic and remote teaching and learning, and the first one to share their stories in a hybrid format. Metzger Fellows, we're really glad you are here. I'd also like to welcome Margaret's family, and especially Barbara Kleeman, to this celebration. As we all know, the Margaret Metzger Fellowship honors its namesake, a beloved Brookline educator, and her mentorship of thousands of students and teachers over the course of her career. The Metzger Fellowship celebrates what is important about education. As Margaret herself put it, the purpose of education is not just for a vocation, but for a quality of life. Being well educated, having an intellectual life, means that you do not bore yourself. Knowledge makes you interesting to yourself and others. Knowledge creates connections. Tonight, we celebrate Margaret and her vision, as well as these 6 Brookline educators: Susan Balo from Baker, Colleen Cavanaugh from Runkle, Juan Wang from Pierce, Will Gordon from Lawrence, and Alisa Connor and Zach Broken Rope from Brookline High School. We at the BEF often say that we meet teachers where they are. The Metzger Fellowship is that motto put into action. To our fellows, tonight we are eager to hear where you are, where you've been, perhaps where you're going. It is now my pleasure to introduce John Andrews, Chair of the English Department at Brookline High School, and our Master of Ceremonies for the evening.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for watching from home. Hope you're comfortable. We are excited to celebrate the Margaret Metzger Fellows. I want to say a special thanks to Barbara Kleeman, Margaret's siblings and children and family and friends who initially got this project going through their generous financial support, and then to the Brookline Education Fund, which has continued that support into our 6th year of this program. I want to say a little bit about the fellowship and how it came to be and what it is, and then we'll get to the most interesting part, which is the stories and tales from our educators. In 2013, after Margaret had passed, Barbara Kleeman, her spouse, Abby Erdman, and Mary Birchnell and I got together to talk about how best to honor our friend and colleague and mentor. And we quickly realized that it wouldn't be a bench, that we could not make a bench in her honor in front of the school. That just was not who she was, that she wasn't about sitting down. And so we wanted to think about, how do we honor this teacher? And we thought about what she valued. And what she valued as a teacher was that writing is thinking, that we understand our minds better when we write, that reflection is an important part of learning and a teacher's life, that a teacher needs time to slow down and reflect and think about what's happened and how to do it better and different in the future. And then finally, that teachers' voices need to be in the public domain and in the conversation about what's happening in our schools, and that we wanted to find a way to encourage and support teachers to share their experiences in the circles where people are talking about what's going on in our schools today. So we designed a fellowship program where we would invite 6 educators every summer to spend a week together, writing in a small room, building community, discovering what their stories were. And then in every fall after that, we would have an event to celebrate them, to give them a chance to tell their stories to the larger Brookline community. We did that for 5 years and took a break last year, and we are thrilled to come back to it again this year. So tonight you're going to hear 6 stories from 6 educators, stories of their lives in the classroom, We're going to move chronologically. We're going to start with younger students and work our way through to the end of high school. Our first reader is Juan Wang. This year, she's teaching grades 6 through 8 Mandarin, world language at the Pierce School. This is her 10th year in Brookline. She previously worked at Driscoll with grades K through 4. Ladies and gentlemen, Juan Wang.
Thank you. So my title is A Surprise. What did a first grade classroom look like in a hot and humid June afternoon? You wouldn't be surprised to see only half of students were ready for my Mandarin lesson, while the other half were laying their heads on the desk, ready for a nap or drawing pictures, chatting with friends next to them. 2 old fans were buzzing in the classroom, blowing the warm wind. A large industrial fan was running loudly in the hallway. Besides all kinds of noises nearby, there were the mowing machines and the construction team busy working outside around the corner. Oof, it was not easy to teach on days like this. It was not easy to teach in this long, draining year with all the rapidly changing learning modes. You hear them: remote, hybrid, and fully back in person. All the little ones were very exhausted in the last months of the school year, and me too. However, as a fun Mandarin teacher, I always look for different ways to engage my students. Today, I had a good plan too. So I smiled and cleared my throat. Some students turned their attention to me. 你好，小朋友, I said in Mandarin, hi, my little friends. I continue with the opening song I use as part of the routine in every Mandarin class, and the more awake students join me singing. Then I announced my plan in the most passionate voice that I could have. We will have our Mandarin class outside today. What? Really? Everyone was so surprised. Students looked at each other like they couldn't believe what they heard. Even Ben, the most sleepy student, eyes were wide open, and his hands was waving in the air. We never had any Mandarin lesson outside this year. I knew this would wake them up. I had a gotcha moment in my sight. It never gets old when you put them out of their daily routine. It energizes students, and I can regain their laser attention. Yes, I continue to explain to them. Last week, we read the book, Brown Bear, What Do You See? And made a color book. Today, we'll bring our color books outside and look for those colors. We can do it if we can get ready in 1 minute. Oh, yes, they did. They took out their own color books, grabbed pencils, and lined up as fast as they could. We walked out of the classroom and headed outside. As soon as we were in the parking lot, we took our masks off. Wang 老师, this is how they call me in Mandarin class, which means teacher Wang. You look very different from the video. I realized they never saw my face without a mask in person this year. In the beginning of the school year, I had recorded myself teaching Mandarin lesson in hybrid mode. You all look so different without masks too, I laughed. I have never seen them without a mask this whole time. We were staring at each other for a while out of curiosity. It felt like the first day of school. I had to remind myself and the students of today's task, looking for colors. So we kept walking, trying to find colors and a quiet, shady place. Along the tree, we stopped behind a tennis court. Black, gray. My students all called out and pointing to a giant mural, a portrait of an African-American man in a black suit. What is it? Who is he? Some students asked and checked the color in their color books. Congressman John Lewis, Xavier happily answered. My brother's 5th grade class painted this last week. I shared with my students a little bit more about him, that he passed away last year and he was a key leader to fight racism in the civil rights movement. But I also admitted that I had to do more research on what exactly he did. Maybe we can Google it together. I know the password to the computer in my classroom. Ben suddenly shouted out. I want to know more about him too, Hannah raised her hand. It didn't take long for them to find the next stop, a lawn sign with 3 big words, Stop Asian Hate on it. Blue check. Masha quickly put a check mark on his color book. I'm an Asian, Yun Hao, a Korean-speaking student, said with a big smile on his face. I'm an Asian too. I stood next to the sign. Was it there from last month? May? Alfred asked. Oh, yes. And I remember we also did the red hearts. Wait, they're still on the window. Look. Finn pointing to the red hearts of different sizes displayed on all the windows around the school. They were handmade by students in every class to take a stand and send out messages of love to the AAPI community in response to the Atlanta shooting. Red check, Ben immediately shouted out. We have to hurry up. 5 minutes left before we head back to class. I reminded students who were still tirelessly searching for more colors. But Wang 老师, can we go to that corner? Ben asked. I have something to show you. Yes, let's go. We all ran to that corner. What was in front of us was a beautiful rainbow color crossing connecting the school building and the neighborhood. Wow, pink, red, orange, yellow, green, turquoise, indigo, and purple. All the students joined together to name every single color in Mandarin. My old sister painted the pink part. She's in the 4th grade, Hassoon proudly introduced. My brother did the purple. It is for the Pride Month. Lila jumped and shouted. Ben ran to my side and asked, Wang 老师, did you read a book called Pride? The cover looked like this rainbow crossing. I quickly jotted down on my notebook. No, I'm sorry, I haven't. But now I really want to read it. Do you like the book, Ben? I asked. Yes, it is worth reading. Can we make a rainbow like that too? Levi started to ask. Yes, please, please. More students surrounded me and begged. What a great idea. But we are running out of time today. Let me make a plan about it. Maybe we can invite more 1st grade classes to join us. Yay, everyone cheered. It was a lesson that I planned to teach my young learner colors, but instead, they taught me about where to find all the colors in our community. It was my idea that I would take my students out of the classroom and teach them outside for the very first time, but instead, they took me out of my teaching zone and go off script and brought in all these precious learning moments. It was a surprise that I planned for my student to have a fun lesson out of this long draining year, but instead, they surprised me by their genuine care, curiosity, and joy in learning. With everything happened in the last year, I am beyond hopeful that we, students and I together, can make the best of it. Students' color books were full of colors now, so were our hearts. We sang the goodbye song as part of the Mandarin class ending routine on the way back to their classroom. Before we put on our masks, Ben turned to me and asked, can we do this again next time, Wang 老师? Thank you.
One of the great joys of teaching in Brookline is the capacity to learn with your students, to have the opportunity to discover, as described in that story so beautifully. Thank you so much. One of Margaret's beliefs was that writing is a discovery process, that in the act of writing, we learn what we really think in ways that we don't without the experience of writing. And I see it every year we do this project. Fellows arrive with a plan or an idea that they think they're going to write about, but it's in our work together, in our discussions and our brainstorming and our building of a community that they find the true story that they need to tell. They realize what that story is through the process and the act of doing, which I think is something Margaret would have approved of. We're going to move to some older students now. Colleen Cavanaugh is a 5th grade teacher at Runkle. This is her 4th year teaching in Brookline, and she's been teaching for 11 years. Colleen.
The joy in coloring outside the lines. I am a terrible artist. I'm not saying this in a, wow, I'm so bad, just look at this attempt to draw a giraffe sort of way. and then I turned my paper to display a beautiful landscape of the Serengeti. I'm talking about when I play Pictionary, I need to really take my time in order to draw something recognizable. My best work is done when I have a lot of time to focus on it. And even then, there are students whose 5-minute sketches put my hours-long drawing to shame. I'm not saying this for pity. I'm just stating facts. When I was younger, I was enamored with my school's art teacher. She was classy and elegant and could put her hair up into a bun using only a pencil to secure it. Her use of watercolors resulted in soft, dreamy paintings, and I thought there would be nothing better in life than to have that gift. As I got older, I realized that the gift of artistic abilities was not one that I had received, though I did try with an enthusiasm that was almost embarrassing at the time. It was only when I reached 8th grade, and art class was no longer guaranteed, but instead something you needed to be invited to take, that I put aside my dreams of wearing floaty dresses and showing classrooms full of children the magic of the paintbrush. School was for academics and not playing with clay anymore. So when I started teaching, it's not that I didn't include art in my classroom. In fact, my first school didn't even have an art class. So it fell on me to give students time to connect with the artist within. With no money from the school for materials, I purchased Crayola markers, crayons, and a few sets of watercolor paints. With the limited skills I possessed, I showed students how to use them and then sent them off to try their hand at creation, or at least creation that was somewhat related to what we were doing. However, over time, as I realized just how far below grade level my students were and how much we had to do, the art was put to the side. The age-old story we hear time and time again, where the underfunded, underperforming school cuts the arts first. There's a heartbreaking truth to this, especially as I reflect on the difference between my own schooling experience and that of my students. Even while wrestling with that difference and my desire to give the students the experiences they deserved, I made the hard decision to devote even more time to academics. We had math formulas to learn and books to read. On top of the standards I was supposed to be ensuring that students met by the end of the year, I was also teaching them English, as all my students spoke it as a second language. It's almost as if my 8th grade self was making a reappearance. In my mind, we no longer had time to color. When I moved to a different school, a brand new charter school aimed at closing the achievement gap, there was even less time to color. The urgency of the work we were doing was drilled into our heads during our month-long summer professional development, as well as our weekly PDs on Wednesday. When we opened in August, we had an incredible art teacher, the floaty pencil in the hairstyle art teacher of my childhood. But when she moved after that school year, she was replaced by a dance teacher. Still art, but now the only visual art the students really got was at the start of the year when they were illustrating ways to show our school's values. I'm almost positive that after I finally left the school years later, the barely used markers I had purchased at the start were still in my classroom. I didn't leave because of the lack of visual arts in the school. We've already established that as an enthusiastic non-artist, I had accepted my fate. I left because while the aim of the school was admirable and worthwhile, somewhere along the way, I think I had lost sight of the fact that the students in front of us were just kids. They were 9-year-olds being asked to write 5-paragraph essays and keep immaculate scientific records. They were being directed to leave the struggles they faced outside of our building at the door. We had no time to deal with them. We definitely didn't have time to color. There was work to be done. Over time, the burden of ignoring the weight students were carrying, as well as their progress not being as fast as the administration wanted, took its toll. By the end of my 4th year, I was a shell of who I wanted to be as both a teacher and a person. I knew that if I didn't leave then, I wouldn't make it through another academic year. My career as a teacher would end in an old building in an overlooked section of the city. I applied anywhere and everywhere. And when the offer from Brookline arrived, I thought if there was even the slightest chance that I could be the teacher I thought I was destined to be so many years ago, I had to take it. My first month was eye-opening. I was lucky enough to work with our school's literacy coach as she was finishing her program at Leslie. Alisa had taught 5th grade at Runkle for years, and she was a fountain of knowledge about the age group, the curriculum, and the dynamics of the school. The first full week of classes, Alisa asked me what I thought about scrapping the planned writing lesson for the day and doing some poetry instead. The kids love when they get to explore and share poems, but really, it gives us a chance to color. I was shocked. We didn't have time to color. Every instinct in my body screamed in protest. There was so much to get through this year, so many things to learn, so many lessons to teach. How could we possibly even think we had time to color? Alisa looked at me, almost pityingly, and insisted we did. That year, under Alisa's watch and my students' openness, I came back to myself. We played games, had lively debates about themes, learned how to multiply fractions using area models, observed local birds, and threw tea into Boston Harbor. When Alisa would walk into the room for our lessons, the kids would cheer for the comedy dream team that was there ready to teach them. And yes, we used art throughout. That year, I was reminded that while it is our job to guide students' learning, it's also our responsibility to care for the whole child. And sometimes the whole child just needs to color. And as for the teacher, I need to color too. I'm still a terrible visual artist, but it's not the act of coloring that fills me. I love the imagination and freedom involved, the ability to stop and try something new when the idea strikes. In art, there are multiple modes of expression and no one formulaic way to bring your vision to the world. My best days teaching make me feel the same way. Teachers all work with the same standards and objectives, but there is no right method to reach them. My classroom feels like a messy art room, little chaotic, abuzz with productivity, and full of exploration. I did not become the magical art teacher of my childhood. However, I am an artist in my own right. My students are my masterpieces. Thank you.
I'm going to start tearing up pretty soon. I don't know about the rest of you. One of the great joys and challenges of running a writing workshop with teachers is helping teachers find their voice as writers. Who are they? What do they have to say? What's their unique story? Margaret Metzger wrote many essays that were published in educational journals and showed up on people's curricula in grad school and education schools around the country. And she wrote a lot about how to bring herself into the classroom, her whole self. There's a great essay she has about how becoming a parent changed her sense of being a teacher, how as she evolved and changed, her teaching self also evolved and changed. How are we open to growing and evolving? How do we find new ways to bring our true selves into the classroom and into our writing? Our next reader is going to talk a little bit about that. Will Gordon is in his 4th year in Brookline. He's a special education para who works with 3rd graders, 4th graders, and kindergartners at the Lawrence School. Let's welcome Will Gordon.
Good evening, everyone. The name of my piece is Well Suited. To be a teacher or not to be a teacher, that is the question. What in the world was I doing? Should I have listened to the many who warned me to stay clear from teaching, or should I follow my heart? One particular bit of advice to steer clear of teaching came from Mr. V, my 11th grade English teacher. You see, I ran into Mr. V one beautiful sunny mid-morning summer day around brunch. As I was leaving the Coolidge Corner Library, I spotted Mr. V. It took me a brief second to recognize who he was because he was adorned in casual attire. You see, I was accustomed to seeing Mr. V meticulously dressed in a suit, shirt and tie, complete with a pair of brogues and a briefcase. He looked as if he were a man on a mission. Darting across Pleasant Street, hoping not to startle him too badly, I called out, "Mr. V, Mr. V." He stopped, turned and said with a bewildered look on his face, "Hi." Excited, I started in. "I'm not sure if you remember me, but I was one of your students in your 11th grade English class. I'm Will Gordon." It didn't appear as if his name had registered. "So how are you?" he replied. "What have you been up to?" "I'm well, currently just working." "Oh, wonderful. What do you do?" "I'm a pharmacy tech at a small hospital not too far from here." "Oh, really? What hospital?" "Kindred Hospital. It's a small, long-term acute hospital in Brighton." "How are you?" I asked. "I'm well, thanks for asking," he replies. "I'm just running a couple of errands. I'm recently retired, so now I get to do all the busy things I never really had time for." "That's amazing," I said. Honestly, I'm considering becoming a teacher myself." "Well, I'll be frank with you. One of the reasons I retired is because I couldn't take all the bureaucracy. It's nothing like when I first started teaching," he said with a polite disdain. "If I were you, I'd stay where I'm at." Those words were unexpected, pun intended. Those words in that moment put me off kilter, especially since they came from Mr. V, who happened to be one of my favorite teachers, although I never told him that. This was a man who taught so clear and concise the conventions of English that I gained such an understanding as I seemingly never thought I'd be able to grasp before. How could he be uttering such things? That was the understanding I had yet to gain. As you see, I didn't follow his wisdom. In fact, that December, I took a leap of faith and quit my job as a pharmacy tech. I gave my 2-week notice, of course. I sensed that there was something else in store for me. I didn't know where or how, but I knew it had to do something with teaching. I had to begin somewhere. I had already begun taking courses, but aside from that, where would I begin? I could vaguely remember receiving emails from a neighborhood initiative, an entity that was involved in creating opportunity from the community to become a teacher. It was through this initiative that I found out about Boston Partners in Education. I applied to Boston Partners in Education to become an academic mentor. It took quite some time to be paired with a mentee, a couple of months or so. Finally, I was assigned to the Jackson Man, to a 3rd grade classroom. My mentee was Marisol Hernandez, a spitfire trapped in a child's body. On the surface, Marisol displayed the kind of attitude where if you did not command the space, you'd find yourself balled up in a fetal position in a corner somewhere. But at her core, she was a sweetheart. For example, it had been about the 2nd week or so I started working with Marisol. The class was practicing their multiplication facts. You know, those worksheets with seemingly 1,000 multiplication problems? Well, I was supporting Marisol. I made one small miscalculation. I told Marisol to give me 1 second. I needed to check my work. Well, that didn't sit too well with Marisol. In that instant, she had no more patience for my incompetence. She sucked her teeth, rolled those big innocent eyes, and with a voice too grown to have come out of that little person, she said, "What are you, stupid or something?" In my head, all sorts of bells and whistles went off. Culturally, where I'm from, in most Black families, you absolutely do not speak to an adult in that manner. You may have found yourself transported into next week via mom's, dad's, or even grandma's backhand. Also, you'd quite possibly be the subject of next week's dinner conversation and have been referenced to in the past. "Do you remember what happened to so-and-so?" Okay. "Okay, Will, you're gonna have to make some mental alterations." In that moment, I learned very quickly, you must jettison your personal feelings. From the first day I walked into that 3rd grade classroom, the class was buzzing. I took one look at the schedule. I felt a rush of anxiety flow over me, not for myself, but for the kids. How is this possible? These 3rd graders have so a schedule so chock full of academic stuff. At what point did they have time to be kids, I thought. On top of that, all sorts of red flags began to go off in my mind almost immediately. Support, support, support. I had the early childhood development course to thank for this. These children had so many needs. It was hard to unsee. How could I focus on just one child? Okay, Will, relax. You're only here on a voluntary basis. What were supposed to be 1 hour increments of support a day for Marisol, maybe once or twice a week, turned into 3 or 4 hours a day for approximately 3 or 4 days a week. I ended up volunteering entire days just to get a feel for the classroom. At this point, I was probably bending the rules a bit, but it was for a good cause. I couldn't pull myself away. I started my academic mentorship in early March of that year, and I finished out the school year. In spite of the many challenges I saw, I could see that teaching would be a good fit for me. This was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. 2 things happened to me to further solidify that I had made the right decision. At the end of my academic mentorship, I received the Family Engagement Award. For me, that said that, okay, this is a step in the right direction. And even though I had no clue as to what the future held. Second, the day I was hired as a paraprofessional was the same day the hospital I worked for shut down. Of course, a place of business closing is not a cause for celebration, but for me, metaphorically, it meant that something was ending and something was beginning. Surely this was a sign from the heavens. Where is the value in teaching? Often when I tell the people the desire to teach, their most sincere advice is rendered. Teach? Why do you want to do that? There's no money in teaching. I want to respond, really? All of a sudden you're so concerned for my well-being? Are you going to make up the difference if I go lacking? Or perhaps you're jealous that I've chosen a more noble profession than yours. In this manner, I discovered, like many of us, I'm sort of a rebel. I instinctively go against the grain. Don't get me wrong, I'm not the kind of person that will go against all conventional wisdom just to prove a point. However, I do believe when the time calls for it, the rebel must shine forth every now and then. I must find out for myself, how well am I suited for this situation? In Mr. V's case, I think his advice against teaching perhaps was spurred in the moment by his disdain for bureaucracy. What is it that had caused him to lose sight of the fact that he impacted impressionable minds like mine? In retrospect, in that moment, I wish I had told him how much I had appreciated him by letting him know that I remembered when he shared with the class the reason he's so meticulously dressed. It did not go unheard. It was the wisdom I carried with me. He told us the reason he wears a suit to work every day is because he believes it is a representation of how he valued his job. At teaching, how you show up for work matters. It is the unspoken value. I know some may disagree with this philosophy, but it resonates with me until this day. So the question for me is no longer to teach or not to teach, but the question is, how will I show up for this work each day? The students are the dependent variable. How we show up for this work each day, how we show up for this work each day. How will I show up and tell each student each day that you are valued? I remind myself each day that I'm here for my students in the ways that I care and support them. As long as I can do that, I'm well suited for this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. That was fantastic. Last year, we didn't run the fellowship. We had planned on this as a 5-year activity, and we felt very lucky that we were able to do 5 years of it. And last year was the 6th, so we were done. And then the pandemic struck. And I wondered in the winter and in the spring, if maybe there were some stories, if maybe there were some things that we needed to think about or reflect on. And I cautiously reached out to the BEF and said, what do you think? Could we do this again? And they generously said, absolutely, let's figure out a way to make this happen. Maybe there are more stories to tell. We had 16 applicants last spring. We found these 6 wonderful teachers, a really excited group. You've heard half of their stories and you can appreciate how talented and gifted they are. I think I thought everyone would want to write about the pandemic, and not everyone did. It was too close. I think it was too close. We were still too much in it. We weren't ready to write directly about the year that we were in the midst of. I wonder when we'll be able to tell all the stories that come out of this last 18 months. And yet it's in the air. It's in the background of some of these stories. I think you'll hear some of it in our next one. Susan Balo has been teaching for over 25 years in Brookline. She has taught English, social studies, and health. And she also said rock and roll, English, social studies, health, and rock and roll at the Baker School. We are lucky to hear from Susan Balo tonight.
I think what I said, John, was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You know, that's what 7th grade health teachers do. This one's called Shelter in Place. In the autumn of 1997, no one was talking about climate change, yet my work home, Baker School, stood still and stale in September heat. Its red brick was impenetrable, like the sturdy third pig's house. Classroom windows and doors lay propped open wide to capitalize on any breeze when a screeching, cyclical, plaintive siren jolted us from outside. What do you think, Miss Balo? Another daredevil kid pulled the alarm? If I were a betting man, Mark, I'd meet you and raise you 5, I replied. Police cars with engines revving whipped us to the windows. Number 6 this week. That's number 6. Our 6th false alarm this week, Amelie piped in. Ugh, such a drain of your parents' hard-earned tax dollars, I responded. Robert Burns noted, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. True to his observation, I abandoned my best laid lesson plans to teach what the world imposed this day of the 6th alarm. We were still new partners on the dance card of Baker's 7th grade a few weeks into our school year. After the noise and the collective eye roll, we returned to our 7th grade social studies lesson. Ethan and Brooke huddled at a round table next to me when we heard it, not a minute later. Running footsteps, lots of them, barreled down the middle school stairs like rainwater over a storm drain stuffed by leaves. Hang on, guys, let me get the door. But before I could reach the handle, students fell inside, sobs, gasps, then bawling girls and a moaning guidance counselor reporting a medical emergency on our tennis courts. The din, the confusion, the blather washed over me. Numbly, I ushered students to our nurses in the auditorium. Some kids clung to me, others wrapped into their classmates, still more screaming. Somehow, it was decided that we should steer the dozen or so remaining late arriving students from the other special classes of art and music to the classroom of my colleague next door. Mr. Cavanaugh, our steadfast golden retriever of a principal, explained. Erin's family met the ambulance at Children's Hospital, but she had already died. She was unconscious the whole time. The EMTs worked to revive her all along Route 9. I am so sorry. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. A room full of 7th graders awaited. So much of my teacher life was plans, lesson plans, professional development plans, after school homework club plans, daycare pickup plans, dinner plans, grading plans, an elusive plan to get to bed early. However, there are no plans for the day that one of your students collapses in cardiac arrest during phys ed class. Urgently wanting to help my students in this chasm of their young lives, I began talking, intent on lifting bricks from the rubble heap of our hearts. Years earlier, as a fourth grade teacher, I had read aloud a picture book about grieving called The 10th Good Thing About Barney. Seemed right here, right now. I followed its lead, although kids slumped across desks, eyes wet and red rimmed. No one should ever die young, I ventured. And no one should ever have to witness a classmate dying. I am so sorry for all of us and for all of you, especially the ones out there with Erin on the tennis courts. I wish I could bring her back, restart the day, protect everyone, and just have regular old school. I cannot believe that Erin is gone. My memories of her will always make me smile. When I was here in August setting up our space, some laughter caught my attention. I looked out the windows right then to see Erin and Renee on either end of the playground slide. They passed Erin's kitten down that slide. Erin cradled it. She didn't like it when it was scared and puffed up its tail. All the while, Renee was goading her on, saying, just let it slide, let it go. Erin was having none of that. She was a very good cat mom. My arms rested over my chest. So would you like to share some good memories of Erin? I offered, counting silently, biding time while my breath heaved. Brave Jessie began. We built this massive snow fort once during recess last year, and after school, it was snowing sideways, but Erin didn't care. She trudged home, came back with food coloring, and wrote our names on the sides in giant letters. Of course, then it rained and people stomped in it until it was just bark mulch and water, but still everyone knew it was ours. After delighted ahas and high fives and blowing noses, I surveyed their earnest faces. So what else? I asked. A nugget from my husband's medical school days rang in my skull. Don't just do something, stand there. All these wonderings vied for precedence like a flock of sidewalk pigeons nipping at scattered crumbs. Where to focus? Oh, she brought cheesecake as her birthday treat in Miss Duger's 5th grade, and enough for Mr. Atwood's and Miss Devlin's too, Donald offered with raised eyebrows and a smack to his outstretched stomach. More enthused yeses lit the room. Carissa cleared her throat next. I'm on the Dolphins with Erin. She lent me her goggles when the strap on mine snapped. She was a fast backstroker, Raphael confirmed. Erin and her brother have a paper route, and my parents say they are always on time, even early. And why can't I haul myself out of bed like Erin and John do? Zach admitted. We percolated a few more memories huddled together as parents appeared at our classroom door and children melted into them. Eventually, Mr. Cavanaugh rounded back. There were no more academics, of course. My temples throbbed as I walked home, still too shocked to trust myself driving. My husband and I fetched my car after nightfall. Stars blinked, competing with streetlights for prominence as we pulled into the lot at Baker. My neck had frozen in the day's tension, forcing me to endure one long, slow gaze at the still open windows of our classroom. I anticipated a custodian scolding, perhaps to distract myself from the gravity of Erin's death. I have taught through so much. 9/11 terrorism, myriad school shootings, evacuations, both drill and genuine. Churches, synagogues, and mosques riddled by hate and bullets. Environmental degradation and climate justice strikes, government-issued wars and citizen-led mass protests. Murders of a gay teen in Wyoming and a Skittles-eating one in Florida. Even the police murder of an 11-year-old playing cops and robbers in a Cleveland park. And a global pandemic. I did not have much time to prepare for teaching about those events. I could not pretend the real world wasn't pushing into our academic one on those mornings as it did on the day of our 6th alarm. This flock of kids needed order right there, right then. So how do we navigate a trauma in the classroom community? The days following Aaron's death were filled with rituals for the mourners and a massive resurrection at Sacred Heart Parish. We returned to school where I passed out a rainbow stack of construction paper, the kids' uncapped markers busily writing cards to Aaron's family. My teaching was, even then, punctuated with calls for humility. I may intend for a lesson to convey certain objectives, but that doesn't automatically mean it does, after all. Just then, in the harrowing wake of Aaron's passing, I doubted myself. Was I pushing these kids too hard? Was leaving space for silence and sobbing more appropriate, effective choice? Was my anxiety superseding the best interest of our wounds? Here, Miss Balo. Renee extended a mint green, expertly folded card, a large pink heart dominated. Inside, peppy bubble letters floated. Dear Miss Balo, you rock. A snow fort and a heap of rocks perched there too. Her dancing blue eyes met mine, blinking brown, grateful for the security of waterproof mascara. Oh, you are so sweet to think of me. Thank you, Renee. I hope that kitten story wasn't too embarrassing, I whispered. No way, Miss B. You actually made me laugh. Aaron said Patches was not just a bag of candy. I needed to be more careful. Renee was right. Handle everyone with care. We act in loco parentis, the Latin reminding teachers that we are legally taking the place of parents, staving off the wolf at the door to the very best of our ability. In the teaching world, this is our duality. One script runs from our heads and our guts out, taking the pulse of the room, reading it all, adjusting. We tweak, respond, try to reach all our students, even when laryngitis strikes, when we've had a fight with our spouse, when we've been pink slipped, or when the kids are simply uninterested. Meanwhile, the other script plays in harmony. A meticulous lesson unfolds step by step. Unless and whenever there is no lesson plan, and we are simply laying word upon word out of thin air, moving and holding our precious students in the shelter of each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I met Margaret when she was my teacher in grad school in the 90s, in 94, and I was lucky enough to come work with her in Brookline in 2001. She taught at Brookline High School for over 40 years. She taught thousands of students. She mentored hundreds of teachers through grad school and teacher mentoring programs here in Brookline. And every once in a while, we are lucky enough to have one of her former students in our fellowship, continuing Margaret's work and her legacy. Alisa Connor is a graduate of Brookline High School, and like me, she started teaching in Brookline in 2001. So we're both in our 21st year at the school. She teaches in the World Language Department, where she is a Spanish teacher, and Margaret Metzger was her 9th grade English teacher. Alisa Connor.
Survival skills from the ER. An email from Jessica, one of my freshmen in my BHS Spanish 2 honor class, dated November 11th, 2020. I have no idea what's happening right now with you, and I don't want to ask so that I wouldn't be invading your privacy. But whatever is happening, good or bad, I hope that it will get better for you. I'm not someone who's good at cheering people up, but I really hope that you are okay. I know everyone suffers through family drama, but no one I know has been gone as long as you have. And for you to still have time and post assignments for us while you're going through something, even though I hate assignments, that's a pretty strong thing to do. For me, this email came out of left field. Relationships are the foundation of all real learning. And one of the first things I realized when we started flailing about with pandemic teaching is that it is really hard to build relationships with black Zoom boxes on your screen. Jessica never put her camera on in my class, and I didn't push it. Who knew what home life was like for my students? When I popped into Jessica's breakout room during conversation practice, her mic was invariably off. I managed to wrangle a one-on-one session with her earlier in the year, and I learned that she felt self-conscious about her broken heritage speaker Spanish. My family makes fun of me when I try to speak Spanish to them, she said. I tried to assure her that her Spanish was real Spanish, that I would help her with the grammar, that she belonged in honors. But even so, I barely knew Jessica, had never even laid eyeballs on her, so her outpouring of awkward, heartfelt empathy took me by complete surprise. What Jessica didn't know is that at that moment, I was stuck with my 13-year-old in a cinder block gray cell in the Cambridge Hospital pediatric psych emergency room again. I wrote the sentence in the past tense and it's the present tense. This whole year has felt, this whole 2 years, couple years, like riding on a dangerously rickety roller coaster in the middle of a choppy ocean. Sometimes there are smoother, if somewhat shaky passages, and sometimes the ocean swells crash over me, threatening to drown me in waves of fear and rage. But Jessica, without knowing it or probably even intending to, had thrown me a kind of life raft. Her email reminded me, I am buoyed. I am not alone. In November 2020, after the wild ride of spring 2020 and a summer spent preparing to do a better job with remote teaching in real time with students, I had thought I was done with asynchronous teaching. Then I was back in the ER with my kid, and I didn't know how long I'd be stuck there. Once again, I had to bust my ass to try to put something on Canvas that my students had a fighting chance of completing on their own, that wouldn't completely overwhelm or bore them out of their skulls. I am a greedy miser when it comes to my precious learning minutes with my students. I inevitably end up creating new materials for my subplans. I've learned I'm usually unwilling to give up valuable time with them, with students, unwilling to sacrifice the momentum of the unit. My desire to not waste our time always seems to win out over the convenience of pre-prepared busy work. In this moment in the ER, I want students to keep exploring music of the Afro-Caribbean world and learning vocab to describe and opine about music. But I also know I'm not the only one going through something, as Jessica put it. It's early in the year and I've only ever seen students on a screen, but I already know that some students are crippled with anxiety, have lost family members, are in quarantine themselves. What life rafts could I offer them to navigate this moment? Here in this gray cell, I discover that an adjustable rolling table meant to serve patients their meals and meds serves as a decent standing desk, and I'm taking scribbly notes. My colleague, Christina, is throwing me another life raft. I got this activity off Twitter, she says over the phone. It's a daily gratitude challenge. The assignment's on my Canvas. I made an example. I'll share the slides with you. There's enough sentence starters and vocab around the margins that the kids mostly have the tools they need. They did a really nice job. You could totally do this with them. I start to get excited. This is an independent project that my kids could actually do. I look at Christina's example of her Day 1 gratitude challenge and make my own. Desafío de gratitud día 1. Tema de hoy, una persona. Yo doy gracias por mis colegas porque son cariñosos, graciosos, generosos y trabajadores. Me dan muchas ideas nuevas para mis clases y me ayudan a ser profesora mejor. Nos divertimos y me inspiran con su creatividad y generosidad. También me apoyan cuando tengo problemas en mi vida personal. Somos como una familia. Gratitude Challenge, Day 1. Today's theme, a person. I give thanks for my colleagues because they are caring, funny, generous, and hardworking. They give me new ideas for my classes and they help me to be a better teacher. We have fun and they inspire me with their creativity and generosity. They also support me when I have problems in my personal life. We're like a family. I dig through old emails and insert a photo of us all dressed in Halloween costumes into the Google slide. That year, our department theme was superheroes. Gratitude can be a kind of superpower, and it usually comes pretty easy for me, even when the ocean of rage and despair threatens to engulf. I got really good at gratitude when my husband was dying. For years, I compared myself to a shark. With a disabled partner, a young child, and a more than full-time teaching job, I couldn't afford to stop swimming or I would die. But no one can swim forever. and I had to learn to build a life raft. The quickest and sturdiest life raft for me turns out to be asking for help. Asking for help requires you to admit vulnerability, which sucks, but also opens the possibility for profound connection. When my husband was declining, I sent emails to friends, church folks, and my work family, and people showed up. My community folded my laundry, brought me groceries, helped my husband with appointments and his physical therapy, wrote subplans that whole spring when he was in hospice. He died on our child's last day of kindergarten. Even while slogging through an ocean of grief, I felt surrounded by love and buoyed by gratitude. Gratitude has rescued me time and again. Desafío de la gratitud, día 1, día 2, día 3. Gratitude challenge, day 1, day 2, day 3. Here's some of what my students said they were grateful for last November. Yo doy gracias por mis amigos. My friends make me happy, help me with my homework, are there for me. Estoy agradecida por mi tutora de STEPS AD. She helps me with school, my classes, my emotions. Doy gracias por mi hermana. My sister is smart and gives me good advice. Doy gracias por la música. Music is relaxing, comforting, a conversation starter. Estoy agradecido por Bruegger's bagels, sushi, onions, mac and cheese. I give thanks for running, for my team, my social worker, my guidance counselor, my cat. My child came home from this inpatient hospitalization 2 days before Thanksgiving, and I found out that hybrid teaching, while beyond bonkers difficult, was also, to my great surprise, fun. I just love being with students so much. It was fun. Jessica, in her email, offered me a gift of gratitude, seeing and appreciating my efforts to offer her something real to learn, to communicate my care for students, even in the midst of my own crisis. I'm sure she didn't consider that that strength came in part from her, from the joy I feel, even in tiny moments of connection with students. Jessica wrote on her day 1 gratitude challenge, doy gracias por mi mamá porque ella es muy divertida. I give thanks for my mom because she's very fun. She's important to me because she loves me a lot. In the gratitude challenge, I might have been trying to throw my kids some life rafts, but they had already been hard at work building their own. Throughout the myriad crisis of this time, I learned to focus on meeting my students where they truly are, to focus on what matters most in our learning together. Patience, compassion, flexibility, justice, gratitude. I know my official job is to teach Spanish, and I have never worked harder to try to meet my students' learning needs. But here's the real curriculum of this year, that year, and I hope going forward. How to build life rafts, how to lash our rafts to each other, how to navigate the stormy seas, how to find safe harbor, really how to build safe harbors for each other together. Thank you.
Thank you, Alisa. Our last fellow this evening is Zach Broken Rope. This is Zach's 3rd year at Brookline High School and his 10th year teaching. He comes from the English department and the school within a school program. And this year he stepped up to become the co-advisor of our advisory and hub programs. Zach, you're up.
I didn't know that Margaret's family was going to be here. I read her article in my undergraduate class freshman year when I was experimenting with being a teacher, and it's largely what led me to continue the program. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you. There are, of course, some sacred truths that you're not supposed to admit when you're trying to be a good teacher. 1, summer break is delightful. 2, there are few moments of ecstasy in life that will ever reach the brief liminal second when your phone rings before 6 a.m. on the morning before an expected snowfall. 2, Three, sorry, not a math teacher. Three, sometimes we put kids in groups together when we think they'd make a cute couple. And four, occasionally we pray to the scheduling gods that a particular kid doesn't end up in our class. That autumn, I was terrified to teach Jack Walsh. We'd encountered each other once before, right after February break of his freshman year. I didn't even know his name at the time, but it's hard not to notice a 6'4", swaggering freshman quarterback who even at that age could grow a full beard, something that I at 31 cannot do. Although I can't remember what our argument was about, it was one of those seemingly innocuous interactions that exploded like a powder keg. I remember him standing close to my face, his chest puffed out, his nose only inches from mine, and a string of expletives coming from his mouth. In the end, he ended up suspended for 3 days. And for the next 2 years, we had done our absolute best to avoid each other in the hallway whenever possible. When I showed up to school the last week of August, I saw Jack's picture on the roster for my 11th grade English class and almost immediately felt a sense of dread churning in the pit of my stomach, already uncertain of how the year would go. So in those first few days before the semester started, I made the preliminary rounds to his previous teachers to figure out what, if anything, I could do to make the year successful for both of us. And I want to be really clear here. I firmly believe that every student deserves a fair shot. I also know that sometimes it helps to see what works and what doesn't for a particular kid, particularly if you have a past history together. I ended my quest with his football coach, the person I figured most likely to have a positive relationship with him, a history teacher named Jerry, who spent each lunch period sitting in the darkness of his classroom, reviewing decades-old film and repeating phrases like, "Things just aren't the same," while slowly shaking his head as if reaching for the dramatic turbulence of some irrecoverable football game. "Jack," Jerry had grumbled in his thick Boston accent, "you just gotta be direct with him, firm, give him the plays ahead of time and tell him how to use the field. You'll do fine." Ultimately, Jimmy wasn't much help. I'd have to figure out the relationship on my own. I love teaching English because I love the stories. I love the way that nothing is original, just passed down and reshaped by each subsequent generation to meet our needs, reflect our fears, anxieties, hopes. In a good story, we can always see a version of ourselves, what we hope to be, what we fear we are. When I'm teaching Beowulf, the monster isn't really Grendel, but the darkness biting at your heels as you run up from the scary basement after your mom made you change the laundry. Our Canterbury Tales isn't a pilgrimage to some far-off cathedral, but a concert at the garden. And your fellow pilgrims, the loud and excited masses smashed up against your body on the green line. And with Hamlet, the ghost is always our own father's. Like Hamlet, my own relationship with my father was difficult. He was an alcoholic, an abusive one, whose first response to even minor conflicts was violence. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, he'd enforced a strong code of masculinity in our lives, probably in response to what he perceived as my queerness, my love of theater, the effeminate way I seemingly held my hands, the fact that at any given childhood sleepover, I'd rather spend the evening in the kitchen talking with the mom about her divorce than downstairs with my friends playing with lightsabers. He tried to instill in me a strict code of what it was that real men both did and did not do. Real men played football. Real men did not read. Real men fought when someone made fun of the way their voice cracked when they got excited. Real men did not cry. I read and taught Hamlet for the first time in 2014, the year after my own father became a ghost and a few years before Jack walked into my classroom. Hamlet is everything, one of my coworkers had told me as she handed over her thick binder of curriculum. And she was right. That semester, a nearly 400-year-old text I had dreaded teaching ended up being the thing that helped me process my own grief and understand my own complicated emotions the best. I tell my students parts of this story when I teach the text because I've always believed that there's a place for radical vulnerability in the classroom. If a kid's going to buy into a book or a play, they have to feel like you believe in it too. Telling a good story almost has the same power as when you come across a curse word in a read aloud. It has the ability to pull in even the least engaged reader. What I share from my own life is carefully chosen, revised, and presented in a way that I hope adds meaning to the story. When used appropriately, I found that those small acts of vulnerability can be a powerful way to bridge the chasms that our generations and more recently our screens can create between us. But if I'm being honest, it's not just about creating community. It's also about the power of feeling our own existence seen and validated. My own high school years were defined by feeling like my experience was a solitary one, that my family was the only family where things were less than perfect. Of course, as an adult, I look back and know that was far from the truth, but at the time, there was no single adult in my life where I saw my own difficult experience reflected. There were no teachers who told me that I could survive and gave me proof through their own lived existence. It was at the time in my life where I struggled most to understand how to continue to live or even where to begin. What I've learned in my decade of teaching is that there's incredible power in the act of truly seeing and being seen. Perhaps that too is why we turn to stories. We just finished Act 3 when Jack asked if he could talk after class. I was a little surprised by his request. He was doing fine for the semester, and despite my earlier reservations, we hadn't really had much conflict. Most days he came, sat at his desk, did the bare minimum. Sure, it didn't seem like we were ever going to be close, but I figured that that was the best I could hope for. Not every kid is going to be seminal. We sat down at my desk, and the first thing I noticed was that he wouldn't make eye contact. "What's up?" I asked. "That thing with your dad?" he said, his deep baritone cracking. "It's the same with me." As I've gotten older, the thing I've learned about these types of moments is that you don't really need to say anything. Unlike Shakespeare, there are no big speeches or perfect lines. Almost no one speaks in iambic pentameter. The best that you can do is sit there and listen. So that's what I did. Over the next 20 minutes, Jack talked about what his life was like, how difficult the relationship with his dad was, how much he hated being at home, and how much he feared turning into him. And let me tell you, those were the exact same things that I felt at 17 and spent the better part of my adult life running from. By the end of it, Jack was sobbing into my shoulder, exhaling deep, barrel-chested sobs. When he finished, I asked if he'd ever talked to anyone about this or how he felt. "No," he said with an almost perplexed look on his face. "I'm not supposed to talk about how I feel. I wanted to tell you. We live in a world where men don't get to cry, where we raise our boys to project an almost impossible standard of what it means to be a man. We do this because we're taught from a young age that it's how you survive in this world, that it's essential to project that no one could hurt you as much as you could hurt them. Although I'd like to think we're getting better at teaching our young men to listen to their emotion, we still have a long way to go. For all the men that Jack had in his life, his father, his coaches, his teammates, there were none that had shown him the essential vulnerability, none that had given him the space to really be seen. There is a version of this story that ends like we've come to expect, where the upbeat music kicks in and Jack's confession is the catalyst for an inspiring John Hughesian montage. The truth is, however, not much actually changed in our day-to-day interactions. His moment of confession didn't lead to some big breakthrough or shift in his personality. He didn't become a straight A student or ask if he could get lunch in my classroom where he'd share tearful stories and I'd tell him that everything was going to be all right. But I know he came to see me as someone he could rely on, an ally who saw him a little clearer and knew his own story a little deeper. The next fall, when Jack was a senior, he came back to ask if I would help him with his college essay. We spent hours together outlining, drafting, revising before he sent off in early November his application. In April, I found him outside my classroom one morning to let me know that he'd been accepted. When Jack emailed me from college his freshman year, he asked if I had a second to look over an essay for one of his English classes. I sat at my computer during lunch, eating my sad little lean cuisine, and offered him my feedback. I said I hoped he was doing well. He said he was, and that he hoped the same for me. That's been the steady beat of our relationship over the past few years. Jack reaches out for help. I do my best to give it. What's important is that he understands that I'm still there. Teaching is about the long game. You rarely know what the big moments in your career are going to be, or which kids will be the ones who stick with you, even years after they've grown and gone. You have little control of what happens outside of your classroom, what noise the world will scream at you from the other side, trying to force its way in. What you can control, however, is what happens inside. You can create the space for your students to feel seen, for the stories that you teach to empower them to tell their own, rewrite their narratives, and find the strength to both exist and persist. In that way, and especially in this time, those stories make us all the more human. And if you try hard enough, you can create a space where even boys can cry. At its core, that's what I believe the good work of teaching really is. And as Hamlet says at the end of his own story, the rest is silence. Thank you. Sorry.
One more round of applause for all 6 of our readers, please. We try to keep this short and sweet, so I just want to say one more quick thing before we go. When I was in graduate school with Margaret as my professor, she talked a lot about what she called the triangle that teachers need to pay attention to. There's the student at the top, there's the content of what you're teaching, and then there's the craft, the pedagogy. And these 3 important aspects of teaching are always in play, always being balanced, always being developed and focused and learned about. And then the last day of our class, she told us that in the center of the triangle is love. I'm hoping you heard that tonight in the work of these wonderful fellows. I'm so proud to honor them. I'm so grateful to the Brookline Education Fund, and I thank you and hope you have a good night.
Just a couple of quick thank yous. To the fellows, I don't even know what to say. Thank you for this inspirational evening and sharing your stories with us. It's tremendous. To John, thank you for your amazing and skillful leadership all these years. To the BEF board members who comprise the Metzger Committee, Chair Amy Deutsch, who, like Alisa, was a student of Margaret's, Molly Yankovitz, Shalini Casita, and Rachel Goldman. To our Executive Director, Elizabeth Ascoli, and our Associate Director, Jenny Rothman, for all the work they did to get behind the scenes to get us here tonight. To the Brookline Interactive Group for live streaming this event and for helping us navigate the new normal. Thank you all for coming and for watching tonight. You can learn more about the Brookline Education Foundation and our work at our website, brooklineeducation.org. Thank you and have a great weekend. So.